We are very honored today to have a very special friend of mine. I'm very honored to have a very special friend of mine, and I think you will agree when you get to know her. 2 years ago when I was the speaker here, back when we couldn't afford to bring special speakers in, and now we're so excited. I know you're excited too, to listen to the three of us that spoke anymore. But I shared something with you, and I want to share it this morning because it was something that I don't remember if she texted me, if I saw it on Facebook or what. But I'm going to read you her bio, but I will tell you this statement probably says more about her as a person than anything else that I'm going to tell you this morning. And she said, you know how people will say, God gave you that child because he knew you could handle it, or there's different ways people say that. And Susanna said, she feels like God has a very special child. And he looks down and he says, who would be the best mom? Am I saying that right? Who would be the best mom for that child? And he picks you. And I know some of you, I know Heather, you have a little boy with Bronson. Some of you have gone through difficult things. We've all probably gone through things with our children, whether it's physical like Jesse with eyes, or there's a lot of things. Mary, you've gone through some, we all have special things, but you know what? When I read that, I thought, you know what, that's true. Instead of thinking, why did God give me this child, or I can't do it, or whatever, he looked down and said, you are worthy of that child, and you're going to do it, and I'm going to give you the grace to do it. And so when you don't feel like you can, look up. And I'm going to read her bio, but that's the Susanna that I love and know. She's so real. I just love her, but that just kind of encapsulates it. Susanna Shuey is a homeschooling mom and part-time emergency medicine physician assistant. She began her career as mommy in 2004. She's gaining lots of experience in sleepless nights the following 2 years. So I wasn't sure about that because you've had sleepless nights after those 2 years too, right?
I had it under my belt.
Oh, okay. I was like, wow, she did that. Well, there are going to be a lot of questions for you this morning. We have a lot of new moms here. Some of them have their babies in hand. So she earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Indiana University of Pennsylvania in May 1996. She attended the PSI Institute, if any of you are familiar with that. She attended West Virginia University from 1996 to 1997, graduating in December 1997 with a master's degree in public health. She worked as a public health educator in a local public health department for 2.5 years. Before returning to school, she became a physician assistant, graduating in, she became a physician assistant and she graduated in 2003. Since that time, she has worked in several emergency departments and a family practice office. She currently works per diem, which is here and there. That's the best way to put it for other people, I guess, in the emergency departments at the Reading Hospital and Medical Center in Reading, PA, and at the Good Samaritan Hospital in Lebanon, PA. She also works part-time at a family practice office in Fredericksburg, PA. Her full-time job, however, is mommy, and she does a great job at that, to 3 beautiful boys, Anson 10, and Evan and Ethan 7. In her spare moments, Susanna enjoys gardening, and I'll tell you what, I haven't been to her house, but she posts pictures on Facebook. She finds time and all that to garden. Well, I don't, but I'll go there. Gardening, cooking, reading, running, sewing, and playing outside with her boys. And she often, if you're friends with her on Facebook, she posts that. It's interesting. She lives in Berks County, PA with her husband, 3 sons, a dog, and a cat. Welcome, Susanna. We're so thrilled to have you here with us this morning. We are going to have something to introduce her.
I'm something special. We're kids this morning. I'm something special. I'm the only one of my God. God made me
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Well, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, or I'm an amateur talking to experts, because when I look around the room, I know a lot of you have raised your children and you've done a great job, but I'm just going to kind of speak on lessons that I've learned over the past 10, almost 11 years with my kids. And maybe it'll apply to some of you, and if some of you have little ones, some of you don't have children yet, some of you are grandmas, some of you may be godmothers, aunts, teachers. All these points can apply to all of you. So my title is Children, Little People, Not Miniature Adults. That's kind of, it's a little soapbox of mine. Sometimes even at work, I'll see people treating their children as if, they know more than they know, and I'm just like, they're still kids. Just, relax, let them be kids. So, but I'll tell you a little bit about me. You go to the next slide, Abby. Charlene gave you a little bit of my bio. I grew up in a loving home as an only child. Figure that, I'm an only, and I go figure I have twins. But with wonderful parents. I had a loving, close relationship with my parents. My mom is actually still my best friend. I think I'm killing her by degrees with my boys, maybe my dad too. My dad's such a quiet introvert. Sometimes he needs to go home and just hide out because my kids are so loud. I was a quiet only, and my mom sometimes was like, they're so loud. I'm like, Mom, they're boys. What do you expect? You had one girl, I've got 3 boys. But I had a happy, free childhood. I grew up in Southwest Virginia. You might be able to hear that in my accent. I've lost a little bit of it since I've been up here, but I still have a little bit of a southern accent. I had a really close relationship with my grandparents. I sometimes will say that I had 2 sets of parents because my mom's parents were quite young even when I was born. My grandma was only 50 and my grandpa was 49 when I was born. So I almost had 2 sets of parents growing up because my mom ran a Christian school for a number of years. I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. I learned a lot of things from my grandparents. So I kind of had 2 sets of parents growing up in my close relationship with my maternal grandparents. Charlene mentioned I attended IUP where Lexi attends, and then I went to WVU, West Virginia University in Morgantown. Became a physician assistant in 2003. Met Lance, my husband, at IUP, and then he went on to physical therapy school, and we got married after he finished physical therapy school. So then my first child, Anson, was born in December 2004. And my addiction to coffee was born. I was never a coffee drinker before he came, but I discovered I had to have it to survive after he came. He was not a good sleeper, wasn't a good sleeper for a long time. I spent many nights awake with him, and when you're going through that, you're just like, will this ever end? Will I ever feel like I'm rested again? Will I ever, feel normal again? And I decided after a few months of sleeplessness that my children needed to be several years apart. They were not going to be close together because I had to have some time to recover. God had a sense of humor, so he sent me 2 at a time. I said they could be at least 3-4 years apart, but he sent me 2 at once. So, but the preciousness of children, you can go to the next slide, Abby, became very real to me. That's another degree I could add to my title, I guess. Master of Sleepless Nights. You can go ahead, that's fine. You can go ahead to the next one. I discovered the preciousness of children, and I saw this little poem while I was working on this, and I thought, you know what, I really, it's hard to, let me just put it this way. I love my twin boys. I wouldn't trade them for anything. Maybe Charlene can attest to this. It's much harder to bond when you've got 2 at a time. One's awake or one's crying, and you're trying to do something with one or the other. You're just like, oh, you're completely frazzled. But with my firstborn, I really bonded with him. Those sleepless nights, now that I look back, they're very precious to me. And this poem, it's 3 a.m., they're all asleep, and no one's here to see as we rock slowly back and forth, my baby boy and me. His little hand is feather light, tucked up against my chin. I hold his tiny hand in mine and stroke his baby skin. The house about us creaks and groans, the clock hands creep around. He snuggles closer to me, still it makes his baby sounds. I love these quiet hours so much and cherish every one, store memories up inside my heart for lonely nights to come. All too soon, he'll be grown up, his need for mama gone, but until then, I still have time for kisses and for song. Time for quiet hours like this, with him cuddled in my arms, where I wish he'd always stay protected, safe, and warm. And yet I know the day will come when his tiny little hand will be bigger than my own. He'll grow to be a man. But until then, he's mine to love with no one here to see as we rock slowly back and forth, my baby boy and me. My boys now are not little anymore. They don't sit on my lap nearly as much, although my twins still do. But you think, those of you who have children grown, you think back with, those days pass so fast. And it's, give them the time that they need. That's what I would say about that. Give them the time that they need. So then God's sense of humor, go ahead to the next one, Abby. He sent me two at a time. They were a little premature. They were born September 2008. It was a high-risk pregnancy. It was fairly intense. So they took them a little early. They were what's known as mono-mono, which means they're both in the same sac. They share the same placenta. It had higher risks because of the fact that they were in that same sac. They were kind of swimming around each other in the very beginning. Higher risk of cord compressions, cords going around necks, and actually Evan did have a double nuchal, which means the cord was wrapped around his neck twice. And so they monitored me very closely. They actually wanted to hospitalize me at 24 weeks and keep me there until I delivered. Any of you who know me know that that would not work. Somebody would lose it, and it probably wouldn't be me. It'd probably be the staff trying to keep me sane in the hospital. So I said, I can't do that. Is there something else that we can work out? So we worked out another plan that just closely kept an eye on the pregnancy, and then I delivered at 33 weeks. They took them by C-section at 33 weeks. So they were premature. They were in the NICU for about 16 days, just kind of feeders and growers. They were decent size for twins. They were 4'11" and 3'13". Evan, the one on the right, was baby A. He was the first baby. And Ethan, the one on the left, was baby B. He was the second baby. From the very beginning, even the NICU nurse said, he'll be your fighter. She was right. He is my strong-willed child, and he's still my toughie. He's the spunky, I call him my spunky monkey. So, I went to, actually, kind of a funny story, I went to the first ultrasound, no idea I had twins on the way. And Lance said, should I go along? I'm like, oh, don't worry about it, there'll be more ultrasounds. So we get into the ultrasound, and I see 2 beating hearts. And I think, maybe he should have come to this ultrasound. But anyway, so I've kind of said somewhat tongue-in-cheek that what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. Charlene alluded to it already. The sleepless nights with the twins were not actually that much different than with Anson, because he was such a terrible sleeper that it was kind of like, wasn't that much worse, so it was kind of an old hat thing by that point. So now together with my mom, we homeschool all 3 of them. And you can move on to the next slide. My profession as a PA comes secondary to my profession as mommy. And I just found that funny. You don't scare me, I have twins. But my profession as mommy comes with all those other hats, that go along with it, like throw up cleaner upper and boo-boo fixer and, all those different things that go along with it. Our family is not perfect. That's just a little prayer for all of you that I'm not going to read it to you. I thought that was a neat little prayer for anyone who takes care of children. It's busy, life's hectic, but it's for any of you. Our family's not perfect. And then, by the way, in case you didn't know, the perfect family is a myth. The perfect family is the idea of those perfect families. They look perfect. We get those, you see Facebook pictures and think, oh, that's great. They just have the perfect family. Everything seems to be going well. Everything's perfect. And a lot of Americans, there's the perfect, 50 years ago, that was the perfect family, and now the perfect family is below. But it looks more like the next slide. That's more than perfect family, especially on Sunday mornings. You got to get with me on that one, Lissa? Yeah. On Sunday mornings, when you're getting ready to go out the door, that's when the dog will throw up and the cat will trip somebody and somebody will get in a fight. That's just kind of a normal Sunday morning. I think the devil gets into the household on a Sunday morning, but that's kind of the normal perfect family. So, daily, I pray for wisdom. Hour by hour, that moment by moment. You're a busy mom. You might not have a huge amount of time for your devotional times, but you can stay in that attitude of prayer. And I do, because my boys, they're all special. We sang the song. Anson, he is extremely bright, precocious. He is extremely intuitive from the very beginning. He could read people. Nobody fools him. Nobody pulls the wool over his eyes. Evan and Ethan, they have struggles that I kind of relate back to their time in the NICU. They struggle with sensory processing issues, and they're gradually growing out of those, but they've made our household very interesting. in good ways and in sometimes ways that I'm about to pull my hair out. You know, there are days that I'm just like, okay, Lord, I'm not the perfect mom. I don't know why you sent me these guys, but I'm going to love them anyway. In the middle of their fighting and recently it's been we homeschool, so recently it's been during homeschool. One thinks the other one's upset, so he gets mad, and the other one's mad, and the other one's mad. So it's just like, okay, can we just stop this? Your twin thing is confusing me here. So I'm not super mom by any stretch of the imagination. There are days that I feel like, okay, what did I miss here? Where did I fail? Where did I go wrong? God, please help me do better tomorrow. Help me to love them better tomorrow. You know, when they're all asleep, you get that surge of, I just love them, and I feel so bad that I yelled at them. But then the next morning they started again, and you're like, okay, I need that patience, Lord, but I need it now. You know, like right this minute. So, enough about me. God gave us our children, and He created them to be children. And I've observed in multiple roles, whether it be at work or wherever, that oftentimes when an adult has relationship difficulties or sometimes anxiety issues, not always, but sometimes it can be traced to something that was lacking in their childhood. It can be traced to something that was difficult in their childhood, that was traumatic in their childhood. Now, that's not to say, for those of you that, like Janice back there, I don't agree with Sigmund Freud's seduction theory or his repression theory necessarily. But I think when we take something from our children that robs them of their childhood, we take something away from them that we can never give back. They need to be allowed the time to be children, because that's what God made them to be. God made them to be our children. And I read, there was a poem that I found that I thought really expressed that. And it says, walk with me, mama. And that can be anybody. That can be grandma. Sometimes we mamas don't have the time to take the time to walk with them and do the little things with them that sometimes grandparents do. Walk alongside me, mama, and hold my little hand. I have so many things to learn that I don't yet understand. Teach me things to keep me safe from the dangers every day. Show me how to do my best at home, at school, at play. Every child needs a gentle hand to guide them as they grow. So walk alongside me, mama. We have a long way to go. So, with that, how do we do this? How do we allow them to be children? How do we allow them to take the time that they need to grow up? How do we allow them to enjoy their childhood? I have 4 do's and 3 don'ts, 7 points. That sounds long, but I'll try not to be extremely long-winded today. When the preacher says he has 7 points, you go, oh no, we're going to be here till, way past the dinner hour. But I'll try not to be too long-winded. So I have 4 do's and 3 don'ts. So number 1, you can move on to the next slide. I'm going a little too fast here. How to let them be little. Number 1 is depend on God for wisdom. That's my main point. I have most of my sub-points under that point. That is the most important point. John Wilmot put it, you can go on to the next slide. Before I got married, I had 6 theories about bringing up children. Now I have 6 children and no theories. That's kind of the way it goes. You think you have it all together, you watch those other people, oh, I do it this way. Oh, they need to do that. Then God gives you one, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do about that situation. Dear God, please help. Your SOS. So first-time parents, we often feel unprepared. We feel ill-equipped to parent. We watch other people. We think, okay, they're doing it right. Maybe I could do it that way. We read lots of books, and we look at the Facebook posts, and there's an opinion out there for every issue. There's a book out there for every issue. There's also an opposing opinion for every issue. You can find answers, so-called, either way. Your main source of advice and strength should come from God, whether it be from the Bible, from godly women, your mentors. Somehow take the time to let God talk to you. Now that's hard as a new mom, I know. It's hard as any mom. It's hard for us women. Sometimes we're busy, going here, there, everywhere. We have so many things to do. We're multitasking, we're women. That's a joke around our house. The boys are off doing something and you can't get their attention. They're male, they can only focus on one thing. So I have so many males, I'm like, you have to look at me and focus. But our main source of strength and advice, it should be God. And prayerfully consider every information source. It might work for the other family, but it might not work for you. You prayerfully pray about and think about whatever issue it be, whether it be sleeping all night, or something what seems so small but it's huge to you when you're sleep deprived and you're about ready to lose it. But it's a big issue to you, and the issues get bigger as they get older. I mean, right now I've got an almost 11-year-old, and I'm starting to see, the issues are bigger. They get much bigger. You get the teenage years and so on. They get bigger. They get more. They tend to have more rippling effects. Pray, and your main source of advice should be God. When I was pregnant with the twins, it was a hard time because the pregnancy was high risk. There was a risk of losing one or both of them. And I felt very torn about what to do because I knew I couldn't go back to the whole hospitalization thing. I make a joke about that, but it was very serious because one of them, could have died. And I prayed about it, and I just felt like that God spoke to me through a song that the Penview, I believe it was the Penview Choir sang at one of their services. And the song was sung originally by Legacy 5. It's "Peace When I Leave It in Your Hands." And I felt like, God, I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to have that peace because I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to leave it in your hands and let you deal with it. And he took care of it when I had 2 healthy boys. One of my favorite songs, I play the flute. One of my initial song I played my first recital was "Jesus Savior, Pilot Me." So, and depending on God for wisdom is take time to listen to His whisper. I don't spend an hour on my knees every day. Sometimes I feel like I need to, but it doesn't always work that way. There are days that I might spend 5 minutes in my devotional time. But I try to cultivate an attitude of prayerfulness as I go throughout my day. And I know, a lot of you moms, whether little ones or older ones, sometimes, your devotional time might get stuck in between something. It might not be the first thing you do every day. I actually had a good friend, some of you may know her, Kim Foreman. She was a great friend of mine when I was in my graduate school. And, she made the point to me that, I can't get my devotions done before the kids go off to school or whatever. I make it a point to get it in at such and such a time. You do what works for you, and you cultivate your relationship with God in the way that it works for you. Take the time to listen to His whisper. God will use many things to speak to you. As I think back over the twins' lives and over Anne's life, there were so many times that I didn't have an answer, and the answer would come in sometimes the most unique way. One time it came from a website. I was at work, and a website I'm just like, wow, thank you, Lord, for that answer. That question I was struggling with and praying about, and it seemed like such a big deal to me, just in a flash of a moment, just a phrase on a website, and the answer came. And that was God. I'm actually reading a book, it's called When God Winks at You, and it gives anecdotes of how God uses people and events in our lives to talk to us, but we have to be ready to listen. We have to be paying attention to know that it's God that's talking, who is talking to us and speaking to us. So, depending on God for wisdom, especially when our children are small, another point I would make a supplement under here is make it a priority to have some time at home with them. Don't be always on the go. Don't be always here, there, and everywhere. We can run in this culture. I actually read an episode in the recent Focus on the Family Thriving Families magazine. And the mom was talking about how her 6-year-old seemed grumpy. He was just grumpy all the time. He was just grumpy, and she couldn't figure it out. And she heard him say once, I wish we could just stay home. I wish we could just play. And she stopped and thought, yeah, I'm taking him here and I'm taking him there. And it's not really his activities, it's mine. And I'm overscheduling him. He's just tagging along with me because he has to. And she realized that she was robbing him of something because she was just doing, they were all good things, but she was just too busy. And she needed to back off a little bit. Give him time to be a child. Give him time to grow up. So that's another sub-point under there. I'm reading a devotional right now called Men of the Bible by Ann Spangler and Robert Wogemuth. And I thought, this one little anecdote, I was reading about Moses. And I thought, this is a great example. Moses he had his own children, but he was leading 1 million people out of the promised land. And he is such a great example. Moses did not shrug off the burden of leadership that God had given him. Instead, he led them, taught them God's commandments, judged their disputes. There we go. I'm not judging disputes rather frequently these days, seems like. Prayed for them and stayed with them. And God loved Moses, praised him for his faithfulness, and strengthened him with everything he needed to stay faithful throughout his long ordeal. And his ordeal was leading all those people, and yours might be, your whatever it be with your kids day to day. But God will give you the grace that you need. He picked those children specifically for you, as Charlene alluded to. He said, okay, here, you can handle this. These are your children. And there are days that I think, okay, Lord, why me? I didn't ask for twins. Actually, when I was little, I thought it would be kind of nice to have 7 kids, but I've kind of reneged on that in the last couple of years. I like my sleep these days. So, okay, so then underneath this subpoint, don't place too much value on what other people think. This is a big one because I've read a lot of articles about, it seems like American mothers, I don't know about other mothers, but American mothers in general and Christian mothers, we tend to compare ourselves. We look at that family that sits on that side of the church and their kids look so perfect. They're all lined up, they match, they're not moving a muscle during the sermon. And we compare. We think, why can't my kids be like that? There is no perfect family. You get into their home, there's no perfect family. We're all human. We're all making mistakes. We're all learning as we go. Don't compare yourself too much to other people. There are some things that are clearly black and white in child rearing. There are some things that the Bible clearly spells out, but there are others that there's a whole range of options. There's whatever works best for you and your family. May not work best for the family sitting next to you. And they may tell you that's what works, but that may not be what works for you. So the reason, I'll go on to the next slide, I found a good quote on this. The reason we struggle with insecurity is because we compare our behind the scenes with everyone else's highlight reel. And that's what we post on Facebook. We post our highlight reel. Oh, this happened and my kids were great and this was fun. We don't post when there's, a drop down, drag out fight, or there's dog puke on the floor, or, we're not going to post that on Facebook. People might think we're a little crazy. But we compare what we see, what little bit snippets we see, wherever it be, and what's going on in our life. And that's not the way to do it. We don't need to compare. Comparison is the thief of joy, said Franklin Roosevelt. And the Bible says, am I trying to win human approval? No, indeed. What I want is God's approval. From moment to moment, from day to day, and raising my kids and being a wife and friends and mother, whatever it be, I want God's approval. So I oftentimes will tell my husband, he's one that tends to think about what will other people think, not necessarily in a bad way, but I'll say, you know what, most people are too busy with their own lives to think about us and what's happening in our lives. They're too busy. They're not even thinking about us. Don't waste your effort about thinking about that. And then underneath, do depend on God for wisdom. Know your children. And you as a mom, typically you know them better than anybody else, or a grandma or an aunt. You typically know them better than anybody else. And what's implied in that is that you have to spend time with them. You can't know them well if you delegate everything, all our care to somebody else. And I know there are some of us that need to work full time. I'm not judging you. But I feel like in my personal case, in order to really know what's going on in my kids' lives, I need to be with them. And I need to know what's happened in their lives and what's important in their lives. I was actually taught in physician assistant school that in general, if a child is brought to you for a problem and the mom thinks there's something wrong and you can't find anything wrong with that child, you need to go back and have a second look because there's probably something wrong. Oftentimes the mother's instinct, there's probably something that's not quite right. You need to go back and look again. And that was actually something that we were taught in PA school. Is take the time to listen. That's a very important part of that. And take the time to pay attention to what mom feels is going on. So on to point number 2, the do's and the don'ts. Do give them time to grow up. Let them be children. I have a memento here that you guys can all pick up as you go out the door, just kind of as a memento to remember my talk. They're all wrapped up in little pink and blue packages, almost like we get babies, we get them all wrapped up in pink and blue packages. It's small. It can't really do anything as it is. If you don't give it the proper environment, it won't do anything. It'll just shrivel up. But it can grow and develop into something beautiful. There's a flower bulb in each one of these. Some of you will have tulips. Some of you will have a daffodil. Some of you, if you plant them this fall, it'll come up on March 26th. And some of you, it will come up on March 30th. So some of yours, it will come up on April the 4th. But they're all growing and developing as they're supposed to be. And our children are just like that. You got to give them time. You got to give them nourishment. You got to give them the appropriate love and nurture and support. Some will be a little early, some will be your early bloomers, your precocious children, and some of them will develop a little later, but they can't be forced to bloom. You can't open up a blossom and make that flower bloom. You'll ruin the flower. You have to give it time, you have to give it nurture, you have to give it the support and the love that it needs. So they don't all follow the same timetable. I'll just give you an example on my boys. Anson, who's the oldest, he developed on a really different timetable from his brothers. He was an early talker. I like to say he started talking at 16 months and he hasn't shut up since. He's a talker, he loves to be with people. I'm an introvert, my husband's an introvert, I'm a homebody, and he's an extrovert. He doesn't need a stranger. He developed on his own timetable. The twins, they were preemies, so they developed on their own time. And even though they are identical twins, I don't know if I mentioned that, they look a little different when you look at their picture, but they are identical. Their DNA is exactly the same. But they are very different from each other. They are not the same person. Even though they're identical twins, they are not the same person. They've developed a little early with some things, right on time with some things, and late with other things. And as in comparison to each other, they're not exactly on the same timetable. They're just very different people. I have friends who have girls. Those of you who have girls, they tend to develop on an entirely different timetable than boys. They're usually 3 going on 13. I think Alyssa can attest to that. They tend to be more social than boys. They tend to pick up on language cues much more quickly than boys. They tend to mature faster. I actually was watching a couple at church, and they were sitting in the seat in front of us, and I thought it was so classic, boy versus girl. They were getting a little antsy, and the little girl who looked to be about, not sure, she might be about 10 or 11 months, and the little boy about 2 to 3, I'm not sure. Anyway, my mom handed him a book. He took that book and he tossed it in the air. Oh, this is what you do with books. You know, that's the point. You know, you throw it in the air, you make a ball out of it. So then as soon as it fell to the floor, the little girl picked it up and she starts reading it. You know, not reading, but, you know, looking at the pictures page by page. And they're so different. Boys are so different from girls. Every child's a little different from each other. And even in the medical world, I'll let you go on to the next slide there. There's the flowers. Some of you have daffodils, some of you have tulips. But even in the medical world, we treat children differently because they are different than adults. They're not just little miniature adults. They have a bigger surface area. What that means is that the smaller the child, whether it be an infant or a toddler, the greater the ratio of their skin to their body size. So they can absorb much more quickly. And this, plus the fact that they're thin as Skinner, they have a faster metabolic rate, they have a faster heart rate, faster respiratory rate. Their medication dosing is different because of that. The size of their head, and you think they're, you know, your little one's head as compared to their body, you know, as you grow, your head doesn't change size that much, but your body changes. And you think of a baby, you know, its head is so much bigger as in comparison to the rest of its body. So even in the medical world, we don't treat them as little adults. Every dosing models for medications and treatments are different. So then number 3, let them be who they are. Here we have a picture of my twins interacting. I'm not sure whether they're about to get into a fight, kind of looks that way. We were trying to take pictures, which is always an interesting occasion because my boys don't like to sit still and smile. And here they're Ethan on the left and Evan on the right. Ethan, as we said, I told you, he tends to be the top dog, even though he was baby B. And Evan tends to kind of step back and let it happen. So let them be who they are. They're different. I read a wonderful quote from Mr. Rogers, I believe, said, I'm going to move on to the next, let me find my quote here. I thought we had it in here, but anyway, we'll get to it. Ethan is my rule follower. Evan's my free spirit. Evan is artistic. He likes to draw and sketch. He loves ice cream. Ethan won't touch it. Go figure. Evan's a little bit more of a sleepyhead than his twin. He's a sleeper in the morning. Ethan's a rule follower. He loves order. He loves numbers. Loves donuts. Evan won't touch them, but he'll sniff them. And Ethan's my early riser. So I've continued my coffee drinking. He's sleeping a little later now, but for a while, 5:30 to 6 was his rising time. That was just kind of Ethan. Ethan, we were recently, it was probably about a year ago, we were getting ready for bed. He loves numbers. And he was counting by thousands, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and went on, you know, he just went on a while. Got up to 900,000 and he wanted to know what came next. Well, 1 million. He thought about that for a while and he said, what comes after 1 million? I said, well, you keep counting and eventually you get to 1 billion. You keep adding, you know, numbers just like you were. So he thought about that for a while. Anyone know what came next? Well, 1 trillion, that's a really big number. And then he thought about it. Can you keep going? What comes next? I said, Ethan, that's a number that you write it out as a 10, and then you put a number at the top that tells how many zeros come after it. So he said, oh, okay, is 1 trillion the end of kindergarten? That's Ethan. That was last year. He's in first grade now. I'm like, well, I guess for you, 1 trillion is the end of kindergarten. So Evan, he doesn't care if there's a trillion. He'd just rather go outside and ride his big wheel. So, there's my quote from Mr. Rogers. I thought that was great. Love isn't a state of perfect caring. It's an active noun like struggle. To love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way he or she is right here and now. That doesn't mean you don't correct them when they're wrong. They're children. You know, they need guidance. But God gave you that child and not someone else's child. As the other one says, motherhood's about raising and celebrating the child you have, not the child you thought you'd have. I mean, when you're pregnant, you tend to have all these wonderful ideas of what your child's going to be like and how they're going to develop, and you realize God has His own plans and His own timetable. So, number 4, do be authentic. And I was looking through I have the Parallel Bible, and I was looking through it, and the version of it's James 3:17 from the Message. I don't read that one as much because to me it doesn't flow as well. I tend to just stick to the King James, but I read the other ones for clarification. But I thought really stood out to me. Real wisdom, God's wisdom, begins with a holy life and is characterized by getting along with others. It is gentle and reasonable, overflowing with mercy and blessings, not hot one day and cold the next, not two-faced. I thought that is really good. That's how to be authentic. That's how to be really you. You use God's wisdom and you really be you. Be the same person, whether you're at home, at school, wherever. Your children will be the first to pick up on you if you're not authentic. That you probably figured out. We've all seen families that you think, oh, they're perfect. That you get behind closed doors and you start to realize things aren't exactly perfect because they're human. They're not going to be perfect. So there's not much more to say to that. And in the interest of authenticity for me, here are some statements that I totally get. This is me. After you become a mom, you just as soon as you shut the bathroom door, they need something. Mom, I need this. Can you not wait 10 minutes till I get out of the shower? So that's me. And then the next one, even more so. You know you're a mom and going shopping at Target by yourself or any other store you like. It feels like a vacation, and going on a family vacation feels like work. That's me. I would just as soon stay home. It's just easier. So, there's my authentic statements. All right. So number 5, don't criticize. And this I hear so often, especially at work. You know, it's an impatient time. Patients are in the ER. They've been waiting a while. The parents tend to take it out on the kids. And I actually saw a visual of this. Someone had shared on the internet, and the adult was spewing out all these terrible words. They were going right into the child's head. I thought, boy, what a visual. But the way we talk to our children becomes their inner voice. You can either tell them that they can do it, they can try again, you're the best, or you can tell them, you're a mess, you're an idiot, go away, stop bothering me, I'm trying to get something done, you're just a problem. The kids they're gonna start to internalize that. That's gonna become who they are. So the old poem that you've probably read, if a child lives with criticism, that's one of my favorites. Maybe one of the next one. He learns to condemn. If he lives with hostility, he learns to fight. If a child lives with ridicule, he learns to be shy. If he lives with shame, he learns to feel guilty. If he lives with tolerance, he learns to be patient. If a child lives with encouragement, he learns to be confident. If a child lives with praise, he learns to be appreciative. If a child lives with acceptance, he learns love. If children live with approval, they learn to like themselves. If a child lives with security, he learns to have faith in himself and those about him. And if a child lives with friendliness, he learns the world is a nice place in which to live. That's an old one that's been around a long time. Maybe some of you aren't familiar with it, but I love that. That's one of my favorites. One of the wisest pieces of advice, or a couple pieces of advice that I've heard comes from the mother of one of my dearest friends. I'll move on to the next one. Ruth Vernon. She's the mother of Sonia Vernon and Brent Vernon. I think you guys have had Brent Vernon here in the past, and Sonia's one of my dearest friends. And I actually read this in last year's God's Revivalist from GBS. It was a whole paper, a whole magazine on parenting. And I thought this was so true. Treat your children with respect. Don't shame or humiliate them. I've seen that happen a lot, and that just makes me feel really bad for the child. Yes, there are times when we have to correct in public, but if at all possible, discipline them privately. And the second one was the biggest one. Remember that there is a difference between purity and maturity. Your child, don't voice doubts about their spiritual status. They're still children. They're still learning. There's still things that they don't know yet about the Christian life and the Christian walk. Don't voice doubts about them. Discipline when they need it, but let them know that God gave them parents to help raise and train them, and express confidence in their prayers. They're doing the best they can, the best they know how. We just have to guide them. We have to train them. And then be quick to apologize when you're wrong. Going back to the authentic part, you won't always be right. You're human. So, and then another one I would add in there is be positive. I'm talking to myself here. I tend to look on the cup half empty. That's just my way of looking at life. I don't know if who that comes from. There's somebody there's just my personality. My mom, on the other hand, is generally a cup half full, and she's my encourager. And she's a great encourager for me, my kids, whomever. And if you can be positive, it seems like you can get a lot more good response from your kids or from whoever you're working with. Parents need to fill a child's bucket of self-esteem so high that the rest of the world can't poke enough holes to drain it dry. And there's a lot of things out there that can poke a hole in your child's bucket. There's a lot of circumstances. They'll fail in areas, but we need to give them the ability to succeed. And then number 6. Don't compare. Here we have one of our recent little family excursions, and here the twins are riding pedal cars. It was interesting to watch them interact. Ethan, who is typically the boss, was in the back here. Evan was leading the way. And Evan, he's the outside boy, but Ethan was still giving instructions. He was still telling them what to do. And he was happy because he was big enough to ride the big go-kart. So he's raising dad there. So. And don't compare. A flower doesn't think of competing to the flower next to it. So when you plant your flower's not worried about what the daisies down the row are doing or what the tulips down the other end of your flower garden are doing. It's just going to blend. It's just going to do what God made it to do. So moving on to the next one. And then my last point, don't burden them with adult worries and problems. They're kids. They don't have the mental and the emotional capacity to worry about adult problems, whether it be your emotional baggage, your fight with your spouse, your fuss with your neighbor, the terrible happenings in the world. Yes, there are some things that it's appropriate to tell children, but I would not discuss with my 10-year-old the details of the crucifixions and the beheadings that are going on in Iraq. That would just send him into an emotional torment that I wouldn't be able to fix. It's not appropriate to talk to kids about that. Don't burden them with things that they aren't able to handle. And a great, Corrie ten Boom, she's one of my favorite authors, in The Hiding Place. You can move to the next one, Abby. There's a story that just so illustrates this so well. From Corrie as a 10-year-old, she said, "Father, what is sex, sin?" He turned to look at me as he always did when answering a question, but to my surprise, said nothing. At last, he stood up, lifted his traveling case from the rack over our heads and set it on the floor. "Will you carry it off the train, Corrie?" he asked. "It's too heavy," I said. "Yes," he said, "and it would be a pretty poor father who would ask his little girl to carry such a load. It's the same way, Corrie, with knowledge. Some knowledge is too heavy for children. When you are older and stronger, you can bear it. For now, you must trust me to carry it for you." And I was satisfied, more than satisfied, wonderfully at peace. There were answers to this and all my hard questions. For now, I was content to leave them in my Father's keeping. And I thought that illustrated that point so well. And in conclusion, I'm going to read you something that actually says it. If I was going to be short-winded, I would have just read this and sat down. This lady said it really well. "What I wish I had known before I had kids that I know now." This lady is actually the director of the Dallas Association for Parent Education. Don't know her, but she just puts it really well. "I wish I had known that my children's behavior was a language, that their actions and words were telling me something about what they were feeling and thinking. I wish I'd remembered that they did not get up in the morning plotting to do things to frustrate me. I wish I'd known that meltdowns and explosions usually meant my kids were tired or hungry or bored or frustrated themselves. I wish I'd known that they needed an adult to help them find the words to express what was troubling them, but they sure didn't need a frustrated adult. And that speaks to me. There are days when I feel like I am so frustrated and I need to back up and say, I'm sorry. I wish I'd known more about child development, brain development, and behavior. I wish I'd known that growing up is a slow process. I wish I'd known how each development stage has its own way of seeing the world. I wish I'd known that most times they saw things very differently from me. I wish I'd listened more to what was true about their hearts and spirits and personalities than worrying about what other people thought of their behavior. I thought that was so well put. Thank you all for having me, and I hope you have a wonderful remainder of your time here.